All right, this is part 3 of our video for lesson 2. And let's move on to, so we talked about radio buttons being on their own and how they can select true or false. They have a selected or unselected property. If you put them in a group box again, it basically again controls which box is selected and which one is not. Picture boxes. It's very interesting when you have a picture box, and I don't have one in this example here, but I'm going to pull up another solution here, and I'm going to say no. So we'll pull up this other one that I've got. I think it's called lesson 2, I think. So. And in lesson 2, I have this message form, and the message form itself has this picture box, right? So here's the picture box, and if you click on it, it has an image that it's pointing at, right? Where do I get the images for my forms? Where do I get them from? How do I put images, the proper way of putting images in forms? Anyone?
Well, it should realistically be somewhere on your server or your local machine or something, depending on the.
They should be. Right, but there's a specific way of putting them on your in your form application. Sorry, not the picture box, the images, the images themselves, right, for your picture box. Picture box is empty when you first put it on, right? Properties are here. Yeah, you click on this and you click on this and it'll tell you, right? This is one way of doing it. You can select the resource here and you can import the resource in here. That's one way of doing it. We're going to show you that in the presentation. The other way to do it is, and this is, I'm kind of skipping ahead because, again, you guys are a good group of guys and girl. So I'm going to go to lesson 2 properties. If you go to project properties, right, it gives you this, and this is kind of giving me an error, but it gives you this resources area here where you can have different kinds of resources, images, icons, audio, files, all the kind of stuff. You can actually add on strings, and here's what I was talking about before for strings. So, for example, let's say you want to access a string that's French. You can create a French string that is an actual file that you access here in your resources, and then you can access it as an object, right, inside of your files. So how do we do that? So first we create the object here. We put it in here. We're going to see another example of that. And then what we do is once it's in our resources and it's been accepted, it's now accessible as an entity, or if you will, inside of our code. Right? So how does that look? So if I go back down here, and if I want to look at some objects that we've created here in our just different radio buttons, change the color of the background, the foreground color of the actual object itself, right? And let's find where the big picture box is. Here's big picture box visible and invisible, right? But what we can also do is if I want to set the big picture box, let's say I'm going to add it in here, a piece of code here. So I go big picture box, here it is, and then if I want to say image, here's my image, right, is equal to, and if I start typing properties, right, if I'm not wrong, here it is, dot resources, oops, how did I miss that? Dot resources dot. And then whatever I've got available, if you notice, look, there's that image. That's part of my resource library, right? So it actually allows me to access images and text and strings and everything else right through my resources library that's part of my app, right? And it holds all these resources in a folder inside of your app folder, a folder structure, right? It's called resources, right? So that's where all your files can be stored. And you can put anything in there, like I said, strings, images, text, other things that are in there, and you can access them in this way. Okay. So in this particular case, it would actually make change the picture to whatever image I want here with this line of code. And we're going to see an example of that later on. So please be really. I would start getting familiar, even though we're early on in the course. Get familiar with this project lesson 2 properties section because it gives you a lot of different things. It talks also about the application itself. It's almost like if you want to talk about this as a manifest. Who's ever heard of a manifest for an app? If you haven't, remember those things we talked about? This is a very good example of a manifest for an app. iOS uses it. They have a manifest. Android, if you program for Android, in Java, they have a manifest for the app. This is the app's manifest. This is what this thing does. And it talks about things like version control, which window starts off first, as an example, what type of application it is. There's a lot of different defaults that this app has, which framework it's targeting, 4.5 as an example. And if you click through here on your own, we're going to go through this in more detail later on in the course as we go. But this is important when we look through all these little options, what is included in the manifest. And of course, this actually is just a form-based version of what you can see in one of the many files that are part of the application itself. Okay, so I recommend you look through this. You can also adjust its version. You can talk to a lot of different things here in this particular manifest, if you will. Okay, take a look, and we'll get back to this later on in the course. Okay, let's shift back. So again, this is the example that we talked about where you import here. I'm not going to go back in there. Right? You can select your graphic from somewhere on your hard drive, and then it'll import it into the app resource files. That's what it does. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Here we're also using our size mode. We use a stretch image property to stretch the image that we load into the picture box that we've created. We drag and drop in here. So here's our picture box again, our picture box control. If I actually was to change the size, then the image would stretch because of our stretch image property that we've aligned here, right? So if I go down into our properties selector here on the right-hand side, size mode is equal to stretch image, right? That's our property. And you can select different other options as well, auto size, center image, and so on, okay? So again, we're talking about UI building here in Visual Studio for C#, right? Big important sections. If I was going to highlight toolbox, properties, solution explorer over here, these three sections here for sure when we're building our UI are the most important. But we're doing another thing today as well. We're actually doing some coding for our controls as well as we move into the presentation. Okay. So adding and removing resources, I kind of skipped ahead here and did this. And let's use another project for that to demonstrate this. So I'm going to close this project down. I'm going to close the solution. No, I'm not going to save anything. And I'm going to open another one. And again, all these solutions and projects are available to you online on Blackboard. Here we go. So this is what this one looks like. And here is my resource form, right? And if you notice, there's a big box, a big picture box again. So here it is, right? So a sample picture box. And you have a group box, and if I click on the group box itself, the group box should not just be named group box 1, even though it is here in the example. I recommend that you name all elements of your, all controls of your forms. There should be custom names for all of them so you can access them so you know what they all are, right? So group box 1, there's things you can do with the group box that affects all of the other the controls within that group box, as an example, right? So, for example, it says if I go through the group box itself and I look through it, let's see what other funky things we can put. There's a cursor. We can change the cursor for the group box. Right now, the cursor is set to default. You can change it so that way the cursor changes when you enter the group box, right? That's what I'm saying. Experiment with your when you play around with UI creation here. This is the thing that's going to give you the latitude to be creative with your assignments. Okay, by experimentation and fooling around. I know I don't expect you guys to have all kinds of time on your hands because I know you're all very busy. But it's an opportunity for you to experiment here. So that's one thing. I changed the cursor. Let's change the cursor just as an example. Now I won't change here. Maybe what I'll do is I'll change it so that it changes to the arrow, right? This arrow. And that's the default. Hold on a second. This arrow with a help, right? So when I hover over the group box in runtime mode, and let's take a look at that. I hover over the group box, right? Then my cursor changes to an arrow as I hover over it, right? It's automatic, except I've kind of created that with the group box, right? What other things can we do with the group box here? IME mode, there's no control. In IME mode, we'll talk about that later in the course as well. We're not in IME mode right now. Okay. Again, you can look at other options here, visible, true or false, and so on. If I look at each of the controls, here's the radio button that I'm looking at here, right? And again, this is called the sunset radio button because it's actually going to produce a sunset picture in the picture box, right? Auto check is true. Auto ellipse is false. There's all kinds of little interesting options here. Say it says checked. If I change that to true, right, here at design time, right, so now I've checked it on, and I run, right, because it's checking for a check changed, right, it's not going to show my picture. In order for me to show my picture, I've got to, create another conditional statement that says, if this is checked, right, then produce the picture. Or I can load it up when the form loads. I can say, when the form loads, load this picture and check this box. That's the better way to do it. I can do it at both at runtime and at design time. It depends on what you want to do. Okay? So, whereas this box here should really be unchecked with the way this has been designed from the get-go. So if I go to checked, I should make this false as an example, and now it's unchecked. And if I want to make it checked from the get-go, then I should go here inside my resources where I have my my form is being loaded here. So here's resource form load. This is the load event, and if you notice up here, right, resource form load, the events are all here in a pull down, right? So if I look at the pull down, it shows me all the different events that are accessible here in the form, right? So let's say, for example, I want to load it up here. How do I do that? I need to know either the name of the controls, which, by the way, in my Solution Explorer, if I look at my form and if I go lower, if I drill down here, it'll show me all the form controls and what their names are if I can't remember them, right? So here's my sunset. So I know it has to start with sunset if I want to make that checked. So I start typing sunset radio button, right, dot checked, because I know it's checked, right? Here it is. So when it loads, is equal to true, right? But that doesn't mean anything. I also have to do something with that, right? So what's the next stuff? Well, if I check it, I can call this function here if I want to. That's one way of doing it, so I don't have to rewrite anything, because otherwise I'd be duplicating it. So you tell me, what should I put in there to make this work, right? If I wanted to access my sunset radio button check changed function, could I do it here? Sure, right? Do I have to pass any objects into it? Because they are looking for some objects here that it's asking me for. Do I have to pass anything in there, or is this an overloaded, function, if you will? Let's take a look. Let's experiment. So if I said sunset radio button check changed, if I access, if I actually call that function, oops, one too many. If I call that function here, right, it's going to give me an error. Right? And if I hover over, it's going to say, error, no overload for method sunset button checked. Right? Takes 0 arguments because I've given it 0 arguments. Right? So it's looking for two things, the sender object and the event type. Right? Well, there is no event for this one, so really, that's why I can't use it just like this. I've got to put a sender object, and I'm not going to do that right now. Right? I could pass in sender and events in there. It's not going to do anything, though. Right? So if I pass in sender, because that's an object, and E, right? I could do that. That would satisfy the requirements for what it requires, because it's looking for a sender and an argument, but these aren't the right things it's looking for, right? It's looking for my input from the actual form itself, not from this thing. When the form loads, that's a totally different thing, right? So if I do this, yes, it won't argue with you here, but this is the difference between a syntax error and a logic error and a system error. It could work, it could not work. If you know C#, you'll know what happens. But let's run it to see what happens. So I'm running it, and then it runs. Okay? Because I've passed in the required arguments, right? This is a type of event, and it actually loads up the picture. If you notice, it still hovers. I get that question mark. Which one do you want? If I click onto it, it still changes. If I click back, it still works. But I've created a way of using my sunset radio button check changed event listener, if you will, or event procedure, depending on what naming convention you want to use, without having to rewrite this again, right? Because that would be it would be redundant code in your document, right? So that's one way of doing it for sure. Let's just get rid of this because we don't care about that right now. Go back to the form, and we'll save all and go back into the PowerPoint presentation. So where did I get these resources? Well, if I go back into Visual Studio, and if I go back into project, the properties, right? And if I look at my resources, I have these three images: sunset, water lilies, and winter, right? They're loaded in my resources, and if you notice, in the Solution Explorer as well, they're here. They actually appear here. And this is where you know there's no red little mark here, so you know these have been imported properly. Well, how do I do that? How do I import it into what's the right way of importing stuff in here? Yeah?
The add resource button right there next to the images.
You would think that's the right way.
Well, you could do it two ways. I've seen it done when you put it in the picture box, when you go into that resource.
Import, yeah?
Yeah, you can import it.
You would think those are the right ways, right? But I recommend another way, right? No, it's drag and drop, man. Drag and drop is the best way to do it, right?
Drag and drop to the file path like this.
Yeah. Just drag and drop. So basically, what you do is not the file path, right? What you do is you do this, right? If I'm going to go exit Unity mode, and let's just go into full screen mode for a second, just so I can show you. So here I am. Here's my Windows Explorer, File Explorer now in Windows 8. Let's not get the names wrong, okay? Microsoft would be unhappy about that. All right, and let's go into our Change Pictures folder. And if you notice inside the folder itself, there is a Resources subfolder, right? And here's where all my pictures are, right? Now I want to add another picture, and let's say I'm something else that's, maybe I'm going to get from the web. I don't know. So let's just find another picture. Okay? And I'm going to save it on my desktop just to be cute about it. So I don't know. Give me a picture you want me to download. Anybody? Oh, I like what? R34. R34. I don't know what that is. Oh. All right. That's good. I'll pick one of these ones here. All right. Here's this picture, and I want to save target as a JPEG. I will put it on my desktop just for the example and save. All right. So let's take a look at my desktop. Right? There it is. Right? Here's my desktop, and I have my, Visual Studio as an example. I'm going to pull that away for a second. If I take this little thing here and go like this, does it allow it? It does. And if I do it, not only does it add it here, but it adds it right in here, right? And then when it's here, right? Now the smart thing for me to do, people, all right, is rename this file before I drag and drop it in here. Because now that I've drag and dropped it in here, it's associated this file with this ugly name, right? I should have said R34 would be the right name to put it. I could, but it sucks. It really sucks. So the right thing to do is now I delete this thing if I want to do it right. This is the right thing. I'm just showing you the way, and delete it from here too. All right, I'll tell you, because you have to delete from both places. Yes, bye-bye. And then rename it here. And let's say, for example, I want this to be called R34, and that's all. That's the right thing to do here before I drag and drop it into here, and then you have a clean image, right, with exactly the naming conventions you want. Why? Because when I go back, I'll leave that here for now. Okay, I'll go back into Unity mode for you guys, just so you see what I'm talking about. Damn Mac. I got to complain about someone other than the user. Come on. Go back into Unity mode, and I'm here. I want to access it now in my area here, right? I want to access that form, and I want to change my sunset picture, my picture box as an example, my sample picture box. So here it is, times or dot image, right, is equal to, look what it says down here. I'm going to use the same format here, properties, right? Oops, if I can spell property. Properties. Properties dot resources. I did it again because I hate typing. Resources dot. Hey, look, there's R34. Okay, so this is the thing that it allows us to do. Once we put it in the resource box, it allows us to programmatically access the image files, text files, string files, whatever you want right here. That's why it's really important to name them properly before you put them in the resource library. So if I do this now and press OK, when it loads up, if things work well, and let's see if it does, it should load up your there are build errors. Okay, let's see. So I forgot my semicolon. Here we go. If things work well, then sure enough, oh, let's try this again. Water lilies is checking out, right? For some reason, right? Water lilies is being checked, and of course I can't get to that box for some reason, and I don't know why. It's just a funny thing that happened. Why did it happen, right? And we're doing it on image loads. We're actually loading it up here. Nothing is changed or checked, right? But somehow water lilies is popping up, right? And these are the things we have to, kind of understand and try and figure out why it's happening. If I take this away, for example, if I comment it out, does it do that same thing? Yeah, water lilies, some other reason why water lilies is still here for some reason.
Could it be that based on the order that you inserted the radio boxes, it's highlighting the first one because radio boxes one needs to be clicked or checked?
I could, but there's no radio box that's being highlighted here at all.
There's nothing being highlighted there, which is the preview, but like when it loads, a radio box needs to be selected.
Not necessarily.
No. No. What rumors or what stuff?
Well, I know the web, but I'm wondering if
No.
that program is forcing a selection.
No, it's causing an issue. The resource itself, the R34, the way I've named it, potentially is causing an issue.
Is it?
Potentially. That's the only thing that's changed.
True.
We haven't changed anything, right? So to test that theory, and if you notice, R34, sunset, water lilies, and winter is all here. I'm going to just take this out, go back to my this picture here, and remove this, and remove this again, just to, just to fool around, right? And then save everything, and then run everything, and it still does it. So that's definitely not the problem. So there's another issue that's causing this picture to happen. This is where the debugging process takes place. We're not going to pursue it. Yes.
Is it selected in the properties bar?
No. It's some other glitch that took place just now, right? And this is what I'm saying to you guys. There's going to be opportunities where you need GitHub, all right? Because you're going to have to step back. You're going to say, what the hell changed? Because it's not just your stupid document file, your .cs file that's changed. It could be 2, 3 other other documents that are linked to your project that have changed, and you don't know which one it is, and you want to step back physically, and that's why it's good to have version control built in. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time debugging something that's very easy to fix. Okay. I'm not going to chase it right now. I refuse. All right, so let's just get out of this right now. And we'll just exit the, and it could be something else. It could be my link between Unity mode and Visual Studio. It could be 10 different things that we're dealing with here, right? So, okay, back to this. Again, if I want to, my smart tag arrow is another way of doing it. That's the third way, right? So if I go back into our picture box here, right, and I launch the, if I open up my project solution here again, and if I go back into message formatter, right, so here we are. Here's my message formatter, and that's why I made, by the way, I made more than one copy of these files. If I click onto the actual picture box itself, you have this little smart tag control, and if I click onto this, it'll give you control of the image, which image you want to choose, as well as the size mode. If you want to go for a stretch image or auto or the other ones, you can do right here without having to go to the properties box. So it's another way of setting up your picture box right here on the fly in design mode, as opposed to doing it through the properties window. Just want to show you that as well. All right. So again, you can use images for your forms and controls. You don't have to necessarily accept the, the default image for your button, okay, or your default image for your controls in any way. You can change the images so they look completely different. So you can customize your form so it functions in your own funky way. Like, for example, when you hover over, you can create a hover event for a box So when, just like we have these hover controls for web-like controls, where you hover over it and it shows that you're hovering over for a button, you could do that. You can create those kinds of event handlers if you really wish to. And later on in the course, we'll play around with those kind of things. So to get you guys used to doing that, okay? Orders and styles, again, more of a property thing that you're going to have to go through. From a property perspective, you go to your property inspector here, and so example, I want to change my message text box, and I want to change my border style from my text box. Right now it's fixed 3D. I could change it so it looks different, fixed single, right? And this is a good way to kind of make it so that this looks like you can enter something in there, and this looks like it's fixed. And if I want to gray it out, this is a good thing to do. You can take away the border altogether. There's all kinds of little things you can do to change the user experience for the for the person using your UI. You can switch up the way different controls work, and I think it's a good practice from an interactivity or a feedback to the user that they've done something that's right or wrong. Is it rocket science? Do I need to go over every one of these slides? Probably not. Will I? I will, because some of you might need it, right? And I'm not going to assume anything, although I do see that you guys are high-functioning human beings. High-functioning. Drawing a line, yeah, there's several ways of doing this. You can use the draw functionality. Later on, we'll talk about that in the course. Or you could do it in other ways. You could basically what you can do is you can create a label that's really, really thin, and then you can create a border, and when the border is really, really thin, it kind of simulates a line. Again, you could use lines for outlining, sectioning off your form, and doing all kinds of things. I'm not going to show that here, how to do it. I recommend you try and experiment with that on your own, but it can be done. Let's talk about working with multiple controls. This is kind of neat. So again, if I want to select multiple controls, how do I do it? I could, kind of shift-click or control-click if I want to create multiple. I could also highlight everything and drag the mouse around. But for me, in order for me to do this properly, I'd want to probably lock my screen, my background screen. Now, if I click on Lock Controls, so here I'm highlighting my form itself, and I lock controls. Did I actually lock the controls here? Yeah, right? If I unlock this control, did I unlock the screen too? Like, how about this one? Is this still locked? Yeah, it's unlocked, right? So in order for me to not have everything locked and unlocked, right, I have to, it's hard for me to highlight the whole thing. I'm just going to do that without highlighting this back end as well. Now, because, this is the good thing, and that's where I'm going with this, because the form isn't movable, like in other applications, you might have it that I can move this form around. Well, see, if you notice, if I click on the top of the form and try and drag it, it's not going to move, right? So you're okay there. You can highlight multiple controls. So here, I'm highlighting multiple controls, right? And all these controls are something I can play with. And if I want to add a new object, like another form as an example, and I want to copy some of these controls in here exactly the way that they are now, with all their properties and everything else set, I could, right? So how do I do this? I could say Add Windows Form. I go Project, Add Windows Form. And again, I'm kind of running ahead for us, but for you, I'm sure you've tried this out. Add Windows Form, and I make it a regular Windows form. Here I am, I'm adding it in. I can name it here. So here's my, maybe what I'll do is I'll call this Test Form, and get rid of the one because I don't like that one. Test Form. Well, if we can do it also in conventional C# language, so Test Form if I really want to. Again, the cases it's up to you. Here's my test form. And if I go back to message form, let's kill this for a second. If I go with the message form and I've got all these highlighted, again, it's really just a copy and paste, copy and paste. And if you notice, it has the same, these controls that come onto test form are the exact same controls that I copied for message form. The challenge is that they also have the same names, right? So you got to be very careful. And we're going to talk about this later on. How do you differentiate between this display button here and this display button here? They have the exact same name, right? Namespace is the way to do it, of course, right? But that's what I'm saying. If you're actually highlighting each of these things, they can have the same names. Here's the display button over here as well, because they exist on different namespaces, different forms. So in effect, they're part of a different class or grouping of objects. Okay? And this is how C# is nice, and so is VB does the same thing. Separates these two namespaces so that they don't clash. And again, as we go through the course, you'll see that we can we'll get more into namespaces and multiple form documents and so on. But for now, we don't need this. So if I want to kill, just as a practice, if I want to kill my new form, right? If I there's a couple ways to do it. First, I recommend that you close this down, right? You can save it if you want, doesn't matter. And then right-click and delete, and that would remove your form from your document, from your solution. Okay, that's the clean way of doing it. If you do it the other way, and if you have it open, it's going to complain, right? So please be careful, because remember, there are XML files and other files that are supporting the things that you're looking at, just like we saw the error that we had in the beginning of the first class, that'll mess you up. Okay, they'll mess you right up. Okay, you'll be working away, you'll make a change, you're like, oh my God, why isn't this working again? And because you changed something that changed something else, that changed three or four things in the background that you don't know what they are, it's not like you're dealing with an ID that what you see is what you get in a text, in a text-based ID like, I don't know, a non-ID like Text Wrangler or Notepad++. We're not working in that environment. We're working in an environment where what you see here is displayed is because of another properties document that's holding all the form locations and controls and everything else. And this designer document, if you will, sorry man, I know I'm killing you here. This designer document, if you will, is the thing that's creating the UI, the look and feel of the UI for us. All right, so be very careful with that. Okay, back to the PowerPoint presentation. All right, so again, you can resize, you can modify all the controls together. You can align them on the form. All this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into it. I'd recommend that you try it out yourself. It's good practice for you to understand how to move things around. Let's talk about user convenience a little bit. I like to call it user experience, but again, these slides are a little bit old. We've moved them over. So here we are, keyboard access. Who uses Alt keys when they use different keyboard-based functions? And this is where you do them. You use the Alt key, and you can program the Alt key by putting the ampersand in front of the name of your file. So let's just take a look at that. Of your control. So here's my clear, and if you notice my clear button in front of it in the text, I have this ampersand, right? This is a definite holdover from VB and other Visual Studio languages that are here. It works here too. If you press the Alt and clear button, and you can change the type of access to these buttons. And then go back to the presentation here, right? It allows you, when you press the Alt button, to highlight the type of field or area you want to go to, just in case you don't have mouse control. But guys, this is all going to be deprecated as we move away from the desktop into your tablet touch-enabled devices. You won't have to worry about this. There won't be a mouse, because let's face it, and I know this is kind of an aside, and I'm going to talk more about this on the web programming side. We're going to move away from this. This is not natural for human beings to have mice and to have keyboards, right? So it's more of this, that's where the gesture language, or GPL, if you will, is coming in, where we're actually using gestures to control our devices. Has Microsoft done a great job with the Surface and with its Windows 8? Is it perfect yet? No, but I think we're moving towards the right direction, and I think Apple has done pretty good. But look, I'm using a MacBook Pro, and I don't have touchscreen on my MacBook Pro. I'd have to get a mod book. That would give me touchscreen, right? But even with Apple doesn't do that. They have a different concept for each of their devices, right? And right now we're using mouse and keyboard, and so yes, from a user experience perspective, it's convenient for us to use Alt and a key to access our objects, especially when creating some kind of app. But in the future, is that going to really be a consideration? I'm not so certain. I think maybe that's going to go the way of the dodo and see you later. Okay? Accept and cancel buttons. You can actually align accept and cancel buttons with your form, right? Why would we do that? The accept button, there's two types. There's the accept button for each of the forms and a cancel button, right? So I can assign that. For example, going back to our form here, right? The display button, if I look up here, and here's my display button, that's what the button is called. If I go to my form itself, and I go way up here, and I start looking down, the accept button is actually the display button, which I have here, right? So what does this functionality do? If I actually go through here, the cancel button, here's the cancel button, is the clear button, right? Why would I bother doing that when I design? Who cares? Is that really going to affect my functionality? Well, all it does is it helps. So the accept button responds to what? The enter key. So again, from a user convenience perspective, you press enter, the accept button, it being the display button, will fire. It'll actually click without a mouse click. And the same with the cancel button. So if you press the escape key, it'll cancel, your submission or clear. Let's try that. Let's see if that works, right? So again, we'll launch the app here. Here we go. So if I press enter, right, does it work? Oh, right? I have to type some stuff in, like Tom and maybe my message, hello. And then if I press enter, here it is, because it accepts my enter. After I've entered in my message, it expects my display, right? If I click escape, right, it clears my form. So that's the advantage of putting escape or the clear and the accept and the cancel button to align that form to actually point which buttons they are. Is it super convenient? Is it something that's for the 21st century? Probably not. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I think again we're going to move away from this kind of stuff, but I think for now, because we still use desktop, we're not in 2014 where they say mobile is going to override desktop in terms of usage and all that kind of stuff. I think it's still useful, and I think it's okay for you to program it. And I think also that you're probably going to have a requirement somewhere in your assignments that's going to require you to do it. So just be cognizant of this. It could also come in an exam format. All right. Let's go to the next section. So setting the tab order for controls, right? Again, what we want to do is really we want to set the focus, right? And when we set up the tab order for controls, it's when I tab. This is again keyboard-based stuff. If I click the tab key, which control is my focus going to shift to next? That's what we're talking about here. How do we do that? You can do that programmatically or via design time by setting up the tab stop property. So let's take a look at the tab stop property. So if I go here, and here I'm looking at my name, even my name label, and if I scroll down, right, here's my tab index. My tab index is 0, right? So this is my first place where my form is going to go. Here's my next tab. This tab index is 1. Here's my message. My tab index is 2. So when I start off my app, if I tab across, it's going to go from name to this text box, to this message, to this text box, and so on, all the way down the way it's been programmed. But how do I see what the tab index is if I really care? Well, the way you do that is you use the View menu, and you go to Tab Order. Okay, so you go View. Here's the View menu. And if I go scroll down, and I hit Tab Order, right, it actually shows you the tab order. Now, it says 18, 18.0, 18.1, 18.2, and so on. Why does it do that? Why is it showing 18 and not 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? Anybody? Because I've opened so many bloody solutions, too, right? Over and over and over and over again. And the way this thing was programmed, but if you notice, they're sequential. So it goes 18, even though it says 18 right here, right? It means this is the first one, right? And then it goes to the next one and the next one. This is how the tab order goes. And you can physically move around the tab order here with by using the View command, as opposed to do it manually, one control at a time. Kevin, I'm killing you. I'm killing you. I'm sorry, Ben. I apologize in advance. Right? I know this is not rocket science stuff, but try and stay with me as much as possible. All right. So again, if I go View, tab order again, and turn that off, it turns off the controls for that. Okay. Here it is. Okay, and again, I can click each of the controls in sequence to set up the tab index the way I want, right? Screen location, I think, is really important from a user experience perspective, because if you notice, if I start off my app, I have it starting in the middle of my screen. Look, whoop, there it is. Here's my app in the middle of my screen, right? Typically, it doesn't do that, right? It starts off, and the start position here for the app, for this particular form, is center screen. But the default, if I go default, is actually the default location. If I go Windows default location, and I run it, it's the top left corner of my screen up here, which is really ugly, right? In my view, I mean, your app should start somewhere where it's accessible, somewhere in the middle of your screen, right? Depending, and this is viewport independent. So if you're using a large monitor or a small 13-inch laptop or whatever, it's going to go in the center of the screen for the laptop, right? So that's why I think it's important for you to change this from a UI building perspective. Here it is, center screen. There's also center parent, if you notice, because you can have in a multi-form document, you can send it up so that it centers to the parent document or the parent form. Okay. And by the way, center screen is definitely a control property that I asked for many, many times in my assignments. Please change the center screen, right? So it's an easy mark. It's like half a mark that you're going to get just from knowing how to do center screen. Okay. Tool tips. You know, again, what are tool tips? When you hover over something, right, as an example, it provides a tooltip. It tells you enter your data like this, right? Yes, it exists. It even exists on the web, and it's not a bad little thing to come up with. Where it doesn't work is on a touch-enabled device, because you can't really hover, right? There's no hovering. You can't hover your finger yet. We can't hover your finger yet over your phone, so it produces an effect. Thank God, all right? Because who knows what would happen if you put yourself too close to your phone, right? In different situations. This would be a bad thing. Right, but yes, you can hover over your phone. It can't do a touch event, but for desktop enabled devices, some things that we have a mouse and keyboard, it makes sense that you have a tooltip when you hover over something, whether it's on the web or in a native app like this. Okay. Let's pause the presentation here just for a second and take another little breather because I know people are flipping out. We'll do a little bit of Q&A, and then we will come back.